if they use him properly, can rush the passer. He's actually got decent stats there historically. Obviously, Grady Jarrett's one of the best interior players in the league. Deion Jones is a fairly good linebacker, especially in coverage. And, that secondary isn't, if they all stay healthy, isn't quite as bad. My issue is that's not enough in this division now, that there's a really decent chance that Carolina has a good offense, a terrible defense, and the other two teams in their division clearly outpace them offensively.
Yeah. I don't know. I probably would have no play on this too, but I would lean under, if forced, just because they're so thin. I mean, God, they have to be one of the thinnest teams in the entire league. Let's go to the Tennessee Titans. Wild efficiency last year from Ryan Tannehill. Some would say unsustainable efficiency last year from Ryan Tannehill. Does get the big contract. He'll be back. A lot of continuity, as Evan and I have talked about from a fantasy perspective for the Titans. 8.5 minus 110 on both sides. Evan, what do you think?
I mean, 8.5, like, I know that they don't necessarily run their offense the way that, we would consider to be optimal, but I do kind of like their formula. I mean, it took 3.5 years for the Titans to embrace the fact that Derrick Henry is was one of the best players on their offense. They really have built around him. They made sure that even after they lost Jack Conklin, they drafted Isaiah Wilson, plugged that hole right away. I like that pick. Isaiah Wilson's like 6'7", 364. I mean, he's going to be an absolute monster. I like the way that I like their OC a lot. Heavy play action. Arthur Smith, he's coming back. I think that he might be a head coach at some point in the NFL, or maybe he'll just have a career like Greg Roman, where he's just a stud OC. They have. I think that they complement Ryan Tannehill well. You have to build in some regression, potentially major regression for him from an efficiency standpoint, because he's not going to lead the NFL in yards per attempt and yards per completion and every efficiency metric they did last year. But I think that he's like a good kind of fit for what they do offensively. And over the years, they've been really good at just limiting opponent scoring. I don't know if they will continue to be that. I mean, I think that they will. I mean, I think that they play like a brand that they can eke out a lot of wins. They're not going to go 13-3. But, I mean, I think that they're going to go, they win like 9 games at least, like every single year over the last half decade. And at 8.5, facing the second easiest schedule based on opponent win totals, I like this over. I mean, I think that they are a 9 or 10 win team.
Yeah, I actually took maybe a month or two ago Titans to win the division. I think it was plus 171 or so. And there's some varied prices out there on the AFC South because it is going to be competitive with Houston and Indy certainly in the mix as well. Eric, what do you think about the Tennessee Titans? I know they do not play a pro football focus endorsed brand of football.
But at the same time, they do a lot of things that I think we would endorse, in the sense that play action is something that evens the playing field at the quarterback position. And when somebody like Ryan Tannehill is your quarterback, they average more than 13 yards per pass attempt with play action last year. That's how we would endorse that. I think they haven't given Derrick Henry a big contract, which I think is probably plausible, given that he might regress. But I mean, Henry had over 1,000 yards last season after contact. If you count the playoffs, that's something that is a running back skill, and he possesses it. Arthur Smith, to Evan's point, is a great play caller. And, Christian Fulton in the draft is somebody, their biggest weakness last year was they couldn't cover anybody, and they also couldn't rush the passer, but those are sort of intercorrelated. And they get a first-round talent in the back half of the second round. I really like where they've gone, and, plus 170 is a great bet for them to win the AFC South, and over here I think is a really good one, especially considering I think we're all overvaluing the Indianapolis Colts and what Phillip Rivers can do, with barely any sort of like acclamation, and his first team move in his career.
Yeah, totally agree on the Colts. I couldn't believe that they were actually, I think they were the favorites in most spots to win the AFC South, at least when it first opened. All right, last team we are going to talk about today is the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's funny to me when anytime somebody cites last year's stats with the Steelers, it's like so beyond irrelevant. They weren't even like running an NFL offense last year with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges. So I think you can completely throw last year out. Now, what you do have to price in, though, is Ben Roethlisberger is almost 40 years old and coming off of surgery on his throwing elbow. I don't know how that factors in, Evan, but it's factored in at least somewhat because the Steelers are at 8.5, 9 in most spots, 8.5 minus 125 on the over on DraftKings.
Yeah, I mean that makes betting the Steelers like terrifying. You know, with regard to Ben Roethlisberger, no question. His age, he had 3 tendons reattached in his throwing elbow. I mean, that's scary, no question. But if we can get 14, 15 games out of him, I think that this can immediately return to being one of the best teams in the NFL. Their defense is loaded. They really have been loaded for years, but all of a sudden it started to click last season. I think that Devin Bush can get better in the middle of their defense. I mean, their defense is like legit loaded. They made the smart play, I think, on Bud Dupree by franchise tagging him and keeping him motivated because he did have a breakout year, but not until his contract year. They returned 4 of 5 offensive line starters. Deontay Johnson performing with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph. Like Deontay Johnson, I know that he has a big fan in Austin Gale of PFF who liked him right away coming out, and I was less skeptical. He's not that great. He wasn't that great of an athlete, but he was another one of these receivers that was incredible in the return game in college and is just so good with the ball in his hands. And man, I mean, to put up the kind of production that he did with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph, again, but it comes back to can Ben stay healthy? Because we do not want to get back into a Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges problem.
Yeah.
I think they should sign Cam Newton. Like, if they were to sign Cam Newton, and I think Ben would just never allow it. He'd be like, no way. We're not bringing him in here. But, I mean, if they did, I feel like that would just really raise their floor, kind of like the Cowboys did with Andy Dalton.
I'm curious, Eric, when you run, 50,000 simulations or whatever, I assume you're putting in some type of injury rate for various quarterbacks, or do you use a uniform injury rate for quarterbacks? Like, in the simulations, will Ben get hurt more often than Dak?
Yeah, he gets hurt a little bit more often. There's also like each quarterback sort of has like a regressing rate, which is sort of based upon certain factors. But like, the idea is that let's say the Bills go 12-4, they're not going to go 12-4 and then enter the playoffs with the Josh Allen they started with. So he'll be good. If they go 12-4, he'll enter the playoffs as a good player. And the same thing is sort of true with Pittsburgh. If Pittsburgh goes 4-12, it's not going to be with Big Ben being awesome. He'll have regressed somehow, either via injury and having put in a different quarterback, or having him just simply regress. And that's really the big issue with Pittsburgh, because he wasn't playing great in 2018. He had a ton of help from Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster specifically, and a great offensive line. Their offensive line suffered some attrition this past year. Obviously, Brown's gone. Smith-Schuster is a question mark, but it's almost a crapshoot in terms of seeing which teams draft well at certain positions. Pittsburgh always drafts wide receivers well, it seems like, and so I'm going to temper my expectations of the Steelers only because I think their defense can only go down. But offensively, I'm cautiously optimistic about them, and I'm probably just going to lay off that bet because of those two competing factors.
Yeah, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, and Evans talked about this a lot, it's blatantly obvious to me that all the Steelers' ADPs are going to be higher in July than they are right now. That goes for Juju, that goes for Ben, that goes for Deontay, that goes for James Conner. Once people actually start thinking and throw out all of last year's stats, I think there's a lot of ceiling to be had at current price tags. And when Evans' first top 50 first comes out, I think one of the things that's going to stick out to people is where Juju Smith-Schuster is ranked. Yep. But that is another topic for another show. Eric, tell the people where they can find you, how they can follow you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is PFF_Eric. I do a twice weekly podcast called the PFF Forecast, which is on iTunes and YouTube and things like that. So after you're done listening to this podcast every week, go ahead and give ours a listen.
All right, really appreciate you being here. Evan and I will be back later this week for the big reveal of his post-draft top 150. So, for producer Luke, for Eric, for Evan, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.